What's up, everybody? The History Guy here. This is Men of War Assault Squad 2, the Born in the Fire America mod, and had a lot of fun playing this about a week ago. Just kind of more watching than anything the Battle of the Alamo unfold. I did a little bit here and there, but really just kind of let it unfold and used it as an opportunity to talk about the historic Battle of the Alamo a little bit. So I thought I'd do something similar to that today and play another one of the battles that are available on this mod and talk a little bit about Custer's Last Stand while we do that. So this is June 25th, 1876. It's known as Custer's Last Stand. It was the Battle of the Little Bighorn, and it was between the 7th U.S. Cavalry and units from multiple Plains Indians tribes, most notably the Lakota Sioux, with all of the kind of famous warriors you can imagine being there. And it got popularized over time as being this heroic last stand by Custer, but those who study the history know he made a lot of mistakes in this battle. And so we'll talk a little bit about this. And this is kind of interesting. They got George Custer quoting the Book of Revelation, and he had opened the fourth seal, and I heard the voice. Oh, I skipped ahead. So it's quoting from the Book of Revelation, talking about the four horsemen of the apocalypse. So I don't know how this is all going to go down, but we'll kind of play it out, and we'll just really watch more than anything. But I wanted to take the opportunity just to talk about Custer's Last Stand and the Battle of the Little Bighorn. So I don't know as much about this as I'd like to, and some of you maybe know more, but this would be a great opportunity for discussion about those things. So use the comment section below for any discussion you want to have about the Little Bighorn. Of course, George Custer was a hero of the Civil War, the American Civil War. He was born in New Rumley, Ohio, which is actually less than an hour from where I live. I've been to his birthplace there. They've got the foundations of the homes that he and his brothers lived in early on. Of course, he ends up living in Michigan later on and led Michigan troops during the Civil War. But he finished dead last in his class at West Point. He really didn't shy away from getting demerits. In fact, I think I read somewhere a quote where he said, hey, people only remember the people who finish first and the people who finish last. So I'm not going to be first, so I must well be last. So he got almost a record number of demerits while he was at the Little Bighorn. I guess we'll go ahead and continue and get this thing going here. Or not at the Little Bighorn, but at West Point, he got a record number, or nearly a record number of demerits. But he had the great fortune of being a dashing officer, a brave guy. And so he was bumped up a year, like a lot of people. They graduated 2 West Point classes in 1861, and so he was originally supposed to graduate in 1862. He'd been a school teacher here in Northeast Ohio for a couple of years after he graduated from college before he went off to West Point. Looks like we just got these guys kind of riding around us for now. He goes to West Point, finishes last in his class, ends up almost right away going into the Army as a second lieutenant. He is at the first Battle of Bull Run. He ends up serving on various staffs of generals. He eventually ends up being appointed to the staff of, I believe it was Alfred Pleasanton, who was the commander of the Cavalry Corps of the Army of the Potomac. So we can see these guys are starting to come in now. And Pleasanton didn't want the political appointees that had been placed in charge, and so he replaced his commanders in his cavalry corps with people that he thought were going to fight. And that included 3 members of his staff, one of whom was, I think by this point, Captain George Armstrong Custer. And so he gets bumped all the way from captain to brigadier general just before the Battle of Gettysburg. And then he leads this gallant charge during the cavalry fight at Gettysburg. And ends up, by the end of the war, Major General Volunteers. At the very end of the war, he's commanding a division. But of course, these guys are coming right up on me now. Of course, after the war, everybody reverts to their peacetime rank. And that means, what are these guys doing? You guys got to fight back, man. Come on. and that meant lieutenant colonel for him, is the rank he ended up with, and so he eventually becomes the commander officer of the 7th Cavalry out west. Serving with him here at the Battle of Little Bighorn and also killed at Little Bighorn were 2 of his brothers. His brother Tom Custer was a captain in the 7th Cavalry, had won 2 Medals of Honor in the last week of the Civil War for capturing flags in 2 of the battles right near the end of the war. So Tom was killed here on Last Stand Hill. Custer's brother Boston was, I believe, a civilian scout who was also killed at Little Bighorn. Also killed at Little Bighorn were Custer's brother-in-law, his sister's husband, who I think was a lieutenant in the 7th Cavalry, and his nephew, Audie Reed, who I think was probably named after him. Custer's nickname was Audie. And so, just devastated this entire family. I don't know why these guys aren't shooting. Too many killed, everybody climbed the hill. So going into this battle, first mistake that Custer makes is he underestimates the size of this Indian village that he's supposed to attack. And it ends up being way bigger than he thought. So these guys are about to get wiped out. He splits his force of about 700 men into 4. Big mistake in front of probably 3,000 Indian warriors. And so he takes about 200, a little more than 200 men with him to try and find the other end of the village, and he orders his second-in-command, Major Reno, to attack one end while he goes to scout the other. Reno's scout, his Indian scout, gets shot in the head right next to him. The blood splatters all over his face. He panics. He's ordering mount, dismount. He's kind of freaking out, and they retreat. They eventually make their way back up to a hill with Captain Benteen, who is leading a 3rd column. And Benteen had been given an order, had been sent an order. Oh, yeah, somebody just committed suicide. This did happen on this battle. Benteen had been given an order to come to Custer's aid and bring the packs that had all their supplies. Well, he was waiting for those packs, and he felt like he couldn't really come to Custer's aid effectively until here's Custer right here. Until he had the pack. So he waits and doesn't come to his aid. Well, man, this is not going well. This is going downhill really fast. One of the company commanders, I'm trying to remember his name, and I'm drawing a blank on it right now, but I'm sure I'll find it as soon as this is over. One of his company commanders tries to go to his aid, but they look off in the distance and they can see the Indian warriors shooting at the ground, and they know that at this point Custer's probably been wiped out, and they're just kind of finishing off the wounded. And so eventually Custer and something like 270 of his men were killed here. I've never been to the battlefield. I'd very much like to go someday. Custer, or what they believe were the remains of Custer, were eventually taken about a year and a half later to West Point and buried. But most of at least the enlisted men, are buried right here on Last Stand Hill under a mass grave monument. Interesting thing about the battlefield at Little Bighorn, it's, as far as I'm aware, the only battlefield in the world where there are markers that actually mark where all of the men fell, rather than where they're buried. So there are markers at least estimating where all the different men fell. There's a really cool video done by battlefield detectives where they kind of go in and they're finding all of the cartridges and bullets and things like that. They actually found the body of one of the men. And so that's over. So there's really not much to that battle, but I just thought it was a good way of kind of talking a little bit about the Battle of Little Bighorn. Hasn't been portrayed all that often in film, but I think the most memorable one that I can think of is a series called Son of the Morning Star, which I think was pretty well done. I think it was done probably back in the 80s, but pretty well done, and I think they portrayed things pretty well. So you might want to check that out. I believe it's on YouTube if you want to see it there. Pretty well done, and probably one of the very few portrayals of Custer's time leading up to and including the battle at the Little Bighorn. Custer had actually been temporarily removed from command not long before this, and then was placed back in command before leading this kind of last attack out to this part of Montana where he ended up being killed. But there's a lot there. There's a lot to this story, certainly more than I was able to cover in just 10 minutes or so. I thought that this battle would last a little bit longer, but it didn't. So I would encourage you to check it out, learn a little bit more yourself about the Battle of Little Bighorn. It's very interesting, and it's interesting to read not only the accounts of the men. Obviously, none of the men here on Last Stand Hill survived, but Last Stand Hill was only one part of this battle. There's a lot more to the battle, and some of the men in other parts of the battle did survive. And it's interesting to read their accounts, to hear some of the oral traditions that were passed down on the Native American side of what happened, even a lot of conflicting accounts on both sides. But I would encourage you to check that out for yourself, watch some of the documentaries that are available on YouTube about the Battle of the Little Bighorn, and let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Let's have a discussion about that. I like talking about historic things. So I hope you enjoyed this kind of brief little talk about Little Bighorn. I'm still pretty under the weather. My son and I are both dealing with some nasty sinus infections. I know a lot of people are. We've had crazy weather here in Ohio. It was 75 degrees yesterday, and it's about 38 today. We had a tornado touchdown about 10 miles from our house, some pretty nasty thunderstorms. So it's been crazy here. And you might notice my voice sounds a little weird. I'm a little stuffed up. So thanks for watching, guys, and we will see you again real soon.